Alright, in our continued attempt to catch up to the movies that have been coming out this year or this past year, we're going to talk about the two that came out at Christmas, and the next few of these are just going to be kind of these two at a time things. So we're going to start with these two. And of these two, I think we're going to start with Wonder Woman 1984, which, as you can see by the title, is an interesting and intriguing concept that had me kind of excited for the movie, because I did really like the first one. And we do have Patty Jenkins coming back, but there seems to have been a slight change in the writing, which is not so slightly obvious when you look at it. Especially when it just started immediately, because I don't really. Because I feel like I had no reason to go into this movie negatively. Because when I saw it, I hadn't heard the reactions yet. So I kind of just assumed that it would probably be maybe not as acclaimed as the first one, but at least, close behind, or relatively close behind. But there's also those movies where as soon as they start, like as soon as you're looking at them, you kind of get the idea that something might be off. And you're kind of hit with a few things here at once that might give you that immediately negative vibe. First and foremost, obviously, as I was talking about with the title, the concept is kind of what brings us into it, where we're jumping ahead in time, obviously, after the first one, to the 80s, which is, well, that whole 80s nostalgia thing has been played out for quite some time. Like somewhere in the mid range of Stranger Things, I think the 80s thing kind of wore out its welcome. Um, there was still the idea of putting these characters, or this character in particular, and the characters that we soon meet, in this sort of retro area, I guess you could say. That's kind of the appeal going into it. And you had all of, like, the colorful posters and stuff like that to kind of give you the vibe of the aesthetic or something. So once they get you all hyped about the fact that, hey, it's going to be in 1984, and on top of that, it's a sequel. So it's like one of the great things about sequels is that we can just start, right? Because we got all of our tired backstories and all that other stuff in the previous movie. We've been through origin stories so often, it's like, alright, enough with the origin stories, let's just go into it. And some of them have been picking up on that kind of thing and just going straight into it, and it's like, oh, by the way, here's some of the origin story in between or whatever. But not only did we get origin story in the first movie, apparently, for some inexplicable reason, we're not done with it, but I even struggle to call it part of an origin story or backstory because, as far as I could tell, this opening scene that's like 15 minutes, 10 or 15 minutes long, it feels very long, has absolutely nothing to do with the rest of the movie. Like, they set up that she has to learn something. She's the little girl again, and she's back in what's now seemingly a much more animated looking like everything from her swinging around just looked really. And this movie was delayed, so they had time to work on this stuff. But I was kind of thinking maybe it was just, sometimes when you have these really big wide shots that are very CGI heavy, sometimes it will just kind of show up. But it is kind of throughout the movie that the CGI looks like shit, so I don't even know what happened there. But yeah, so young Diana is running this whole course, and she's getting more life lessons from Robin Wright and Connie Nielsen, to the point that they especially set something up that maybe if you ask somebody involved, like a writer, they might give you some very, very, very loose way this lesson that she learns connects to anything else in the movie, but I didn't catch it if it's there. So, I don't know why this is here, except for the fact to make. I don't know if they were setting out to make the movie over 2.5 hours, which it really does. It's one thing if it's like you see the runtime and you're like, okay, well, if they can fill this out, maybe if it has like really good pacing, it won't matter. But then when you start with this scene as long as it is, and it's like, oh, this is why, this is how long it is. Like, this is the kind of shit that you're keeping us from the story anyway. And you're just gonna stretch it out with this shit. It'll leave a bad taste in your mouth very quickly before the movie's even really started. As far as the shit that matters, yes, long before the movie has actually started, depending on what your criteria of that is. Um, there's also a kind of, I mean, Zimmer's doing the score, of course, but I don't. There's something about it that seemed really. I mean, I've heard even the people that kind of dislike it still kind of praise Zimmer's score, but this just felt really out of place. It sort of, to me, sounded like the score you'd hear in like a '90s comedy, like a '90s family movie or something, and it just really did. And not to bash '90s family movies per se or their scores, but it doesn't fit. Like nothing we're looking at here fits at all. And it was like, okay, well, this is just a weird opening. Maybe if we get past this opening, we'll be fine. But the shitty CGI was still there, and that score was still there, and that actually started to be a little more fitting, but not in the good way, because we have this scene in a mall that is so. It's obviously like comes off really cartoonish and slapsticky and stuff like that, and ridiculous. But I have seen the defense that says, like, what exactly is silly and outlandish in a movie with this premise, because we're dealing with superheroes and stuff like that. I get that, and I've used that before, but that argument also only goes so far, because once again, we're dealing with a certain tone, because especially when you're doing the whole franchise thing, you're already working in an established, forget that it's specifically a direct sequel to one movie, but they're already in this. I mean, it's obviously very fractured and uncertain at this point, but there's somewhat kind of of an established universe, I guess. And I know that's kind of hard to take into account now because their tones have always been way off. But if we are talking, so I just went on that whole tangent for no reason. So to come back to this is a direct sequel to the first movie, we do have an established tone. It's and it just really doesn't work within it at all. And I'm not saying to not encourage branching out of one tone. If you want to tell a story in one way and then you could continue that story, but kind of give it a new fresh feel. Seems like it should absolutely be encouraged, but this attempt just really isn't working and feels so far removed from where we were going that it's jarring and weird, and the whole thing just feels off. And like to the point that I didn't even know how to register specifically that mall scene. And I hate to be one of those people that like blows one scene out of proportion in regards to how not so great it is, but it was. I really wasn't sure if this was. I don't know. I don't know what they could have possibly been thinking with that. But to continue on, there is a problem that we once had a while back in the sort of superhero thing, like since it started, like going back to like Spider-Man 3 being one of the most obvious examples, and it's happened frequently since, is too many villains syndrome. And this only has like two in it, and it kind of felt like that. It felt like Spider-Man 3 levels of bloat, only having two villains in it. And so this is obviously not because you have two established characters, and we start off with Kristen Wiig, obviously, who I'm not really a fan of anyway. I'm like one of the only people that doesn't love her like unconditionally for whatever. But I was concerned because when she came in and her character was, obviously she's very drawn to Diana, she wants to be like Diana, but she's like, everybody at work ignores her, and she's like really dorky, and she's an outcast and all that. But she takes a real close, maybe too close liking to the hero. And as I was watching it, I had this epiphany where it was like, so and I was concerned because it's like, so she's basically Max Dillon. And I don't know, which one came first as far as comics, but comics is not what I'm talking about. I'm specifically talking about Jamie Foxx's performance in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is what Wiig is doing here. And that performance, of course, was ripped to shreds. I had to defend it so hard when it came out. And so it was like, since people usually love Wig so unconditionally, I just kept thinking, I am gonna be so fucking pissed off if people thrash Jamie Foxx as much as they did for his performance in that, if they are praising Wig for the same thing. And as far as I know, that's not happening. So, but that's what really this whole character feels like. That whole arc feels very revisited, I guess you could say. So then we have our other villain, who is Pedro Pascal, who is like a snake oil salesman. And both our villains just happen to come across this stone or gem of sorts that you can make wishes off of. And this kind of takes us back to the mall scene where I was talking about. You can make the argument that when you establish a world with these kind of characters in it, like Wonder Woman, for instance, is there a place that's too... I mean, I want to say dumb, but it's like something so outlandish that it's too ridiculous even for this world. And I don't know so much that it's the concept. It sounds ridiculous when you just describe it. Like it's a rock you can make wishes with, and that's what the villain uses. Especially after he wishes to be the thing itself, so that he can go around and convince people to make wishes off of him by touching him, even though apparently you don't have to be touching him by the end. For some reason. The rules are all up in the air, but, I don't know, you hear about multiple writers, and it's like, I don't know that it was, like, a writer's room. I feel like somebody wrote something and then handed it off to somebody in a different place, and that's how this was written, by the time we get to the end of it. But, it's really the way that it's handled, I think. Like I said, you can't necessarily assume that this would be just a bad concept in general, because there's a lot of, good that's come out of seemingly bad concepts before, but these writers certainly were not going to find that with this concept. So, then we kind of keep cutting back and forth between Wig kind of, but not really, having many villain-like developments. Like, obviously she has strength because she wishes to be like Diana, not realizing what Diana is. Which is kind of interesting, once again, in concept, but it's just, all of the scenes, building up to this are so redundant. Like, there's not even a building up, really. And then you've got Pedro Pascal doing his thing, and it feels like they're on two different planets every time we cut back and forth between the two. It's like whenever they cross paths in the movie, it's almost weird, because it feels like when they're separated, they're coming from two completely different places. And then just right in the middle of all this, you got the whole Chris Pine thing, where Diana's wish on it is to bring Chris Pine back. Which is another weird thing, because while everything else just kind of appears when you wish for it throughout the rest of the movie, for some reason, Chris Pine is a special case, where he has to take over an actual living person's body for, I don't know what the reason is. I don't think the movie does either. So it basically does like the Heaven Can Wait thing, where he looks like the dude whose body he's taken over, but for the sake of having the star of the movie in it, we see him as, I guess... Well, we can't really say as Diana sees him, because apparently Diana sees him as the other guy, but we as the audience see him as Chris Pine, because they cast Chris Pine. That's why. We have to deal with that. And like I said, like the Heaven Can Wait thing, where we get occasional glimpses of his real form, like in maybe a mirror for a split second or something. But so there's that. And then we come full circle to what was going on in the first movie, where when Diana seemed really out of place, and he kind of had to show her around and tell her like what was weird and what wasn't, and what she can do to blend in, and what's going to make her stand out, and not in a good way. Now it's her doing that to him, because this is him in 1984, and the obvious comedy happens. It's, like I said, it's basically mirroring what we saw in the first one, and that's fine, I guess. It also, obviously, will probably have inevitable comparisons to Captain America being in present day and stuff like that, but it mainly felt like a mirror of the first movie, which I imagine was the main intention. And then we just go from there. They find convoluted ways to throw action scenes into it, and there's nothing that, like I said, there's the bad CGI. There's a couple of mannequin children that just stand in the road even when there's like speeding cars coming towards them because Diana needs somebody to save, and they they also have or I guess don't have there's action in the first movie that's good, but there's like one specific standout with the No Man's Land scene, and it's like people came out of the first movie saying oh, the movie was good, but the No Man's Land scene was like holy shit, and it's like that really stood out, and it was this really big sort of centerpiece scene. It left people something to talk about, and had some sort of great action and like adventure quality to it. And I can't even think of one scene in this that is even meant to come close to that. it's just all the action scenes are just kind of there because that's what we're supposedly here for, I guess. It's like here's Diana, saving somebody, and here's Diana saving somebody else in these little convoluted situations we just kind of came up with at seemingly the last minute. So, which usually involves characters being dumb shits that would even put them in that position, which is believable to an extent. But as far as like making everything feel cohesive, that's not even here. I don't think cohesive is even in the dictionary of any of these people that had anything to do with this. At least at the moment. So, and we also throw in stuff like the armor. I would say there's a lot of build up to the armor, but there kind of isn't because it's really late. It feels really late anyway into the movie when they just decide to give us the backstory of the armor. Here's a fucking idea. How about instead of that really useless scene that has nothing to do with anything in the first 15 minutes, how about you make the first 10 or 15 minutes of the movie, or not even that, maybe a good 3 to 5 minutes, or if that, you could have given us the introduction to the armor instead of just saying, oh, by the way, really late into the movie, this thing's going to be important in the climax. Did we tell you in time? So that you have time to, get hyped over? And sure, there's the advertisements or whatever, but I mean, as far as the movie itself, as somebody that avoids advertisements, I found that extremely lame that they waited that long to build up. Oh, by the way, she has armor that's going to be important. And then by the time it happens, you even have to question: was the armor that important? Like, was it that useful, or was it just for advertisements and for the look? That could be the case. And speaking of looks, I talked about what we're doing with Wig. And her not so build up to becoming a character named Cheetah. And I had seen pictures of the comic book character, of the various versions of the comic book character. And I was like, that's gonna be Wig. That'll be interesting. Plot twist: it's not that interesting. Much like the armor, they weren't in any damn hurry to introduce it, so it was like, well, what is it? She saw that Diana had, cheetah print on her heels. And she's like, oh, hey, I like that. If I remember correctly, that's pretty much the only indication of why she chose, because obviously she's wishing for this shit. And then there's no transformation, there's nothing like that. And then when we finally see her, Kristen Wiig as Cheetah, all in quotes, I'm not entirely sure Kristen Wiig was ever on the set when Cheetah was an actual character in the movie. Because this is... I mean, we're talking about the shitty CGI to the point that it's getting a little repetitive, but I mean, if that reached its peak in any scene, the shittiness of the CGI, it would be the appearance of the villain we've been kind of building up the whole movie. And it's for a good 2 minutes, if that. And it's just another boring-ass CGI action scene, while something else is happening that we barely give a shit about, because it's very clear as far... Like, you're talking about raising the stakes. And yeah, the stakes should be high, but this is a case where, given the concept that we're dealing with, the whole, wishing thing. As big as this gets and as out of control as this gets, it never really feels like this isn't gonna be reversed in a really easy, contrived, lazy way. Like a really just shitty, who gives a fuck way. And they try to make it this big triumphant moment by bringing in. Remember how I talked about that? I personally don't think that Zimmer's score was particularly up to par in this one. You can sense the desperation in that because they bring in "Beautiful Lie" from Batman vs Superman, the score that played over the opening credits when we saw the Waynes killed in his whole origin story, which is just an incredible piece of music. So they're like, we'll stick that in. We need a triumphant moment, but we're tired of working. Like, that's what it feels like the writers and everybody else working on this movie was. It's like, man, we're tired of this. The CGI, the writing, whatever. It's just, we started this, but we don't really want to do this anymore. So let's just quit. Because not only are they bringing in the score to another movie for their... And I know I was talking about establishing, universes and stuff like that. But I mean, Wonder Woman already has her own recognizable theme. So, I don't know why the theme that played during Bruce Wayne's origin story needed this, except for the fact that it was the best sound they could get to make this scene seem as triumphant as they wanted it to seem. And it's probably the cheesiest scene in the movie, and ridiculous, so that almost felt like cheating. Like, they knew the kind of shit they were dealing with, and it's like, well, what worked before? Do you think it'll work again? Do you think anybody will notice? I don't know. But, on top of that, as if that's not lame enough, and I guess, I don't know if this is spoiler territory or not, but I just gotta say, I don't think there's any fucking consequences here. Like, when we're talking about the stakes, like, it's one thing if you feel like, oh, this is probably gonna be solved in an easy and contrived way, whatever. But even if something is solved in a contrived way, you would still expect for the people that need consequences to get consequences, right? Should that not be how the movie ends? And I'm not talking like cliffhanger shit. I'm talking about the movie just abandons shit. Like, it was just... For a movie that's 2.5 hours, it was kind of in a hurry to just end itself. And it's like, maybe you could call that, movie suicide. Like, it was like, we just need to end this soon. Like, we realize the trap we've put ourselves in. We're already this far in. We don't know how to get ourselves out of it. So let's just literally kill ourselves. Like, let's just end it abruptly before it's really over. And that's, and you've got that mid-credits thing that's about the most obvious cameo you could possibly imagine, but, maybe that, whatever. Maybe that made some people happy, I guess. But I just don't know how we got to this. Like I said, especially with, like, I don't know, because we got most of the same people here, and, Patty Jenkins is still here, but this just, like, really... I mean, you talk about, movies that don't, live up to their first movie or whatever, and there's always going to be that kind of pressure, and it's like, don't necessarily try to hold it up too much to that, like, it has to be this particular level of good. And it's, even when you're being that easy on it, I don't know that I could have expected, personally, just how off the rails this fucking thing went. But, yeah, so, I don't know. I was kind of, when I had finished it and then I looked up the reactions to it, there was this relief, because I felt like, if this is as acclaimed as the first movie was, I have to be going insane. Like, I have to be imagining this whole thing. But luckily I don't seem to be in the minority at all. So, there's that. So, I guess I don't know what happened here, and you would think that, Gallows Charm would go, take it at least somewhere, but or even Chris Pine, the scenes with her and Chris Pine, you feel like those should be, like, if none of the rest of the movie has any life in it, these should be the scenes that do. And even though you have the feeling that that should be what it is, even as you're watching them, I just didn't get anything out of any of it. So I don't know. I'm trying to think right now if there's anything that I do like about it at all. I do like Pedro Pascal's presence kind of in general. Not so much this character, but it is the case where, like, they kept him so under wraps for so long that they're saying, like, hey, Pedro Pascal's in it, but, who is he playing? Does anybody know who he's playing? Nobody knows. It's, as soon as you see Pedro Pascal in, like, a movie, it's like, well, he's the villain, clearly. I mean, why would that change? Which, of course, isn't even a twist of sorts like it is in some of his other villain roles. It's just this bullshit. The I wish I was a wishing rock shit. I don't know. I don't know. It's a fucking disaster, whatever it is. So, let's go on to the movie that also came out on Christmas to kind of wash the bad taste of Wonder Woman 84 out of your mouth, I suppose, which is Soul, which is the new Pixar movie. And I really didn't know, I don't know what anybody knew going into this about what it was, but I didn't really know anything except of the wordplay on the music and the actual, like, whether it was an afterlife thing or an out-of-body thing or what it is. It's kind of all of the above. It's an afterlife thing and a pre-life thing and an out-of-body thing. It's like all of them. And the thing is you might immediately think, like, oh, afterlife and music and kind of coming together, and it's like, didn't they just do this with Coco? But it does have more that it wants to go into. This certainly isn't Coco level, but I don't think anybody's trying to make those comparisons as far as quality. As far as I've seen, a lot of comparisons are coming from Inside Out, and I do like this. I like this significantly more than I like Inside Out, but I'm one of those people that doesn't really care for Inside Out. And while it starts off, as you would expect, as a seemingly normal story, where it's this guy who's voiced by Jamie Foxx, and he's this teacher that's just really... He has a lot more love for music than this profession will ever give him any of that satisfaction or fulfillment. So he manages to land a gig playing with this icon of sorts in the industry and in their particular style of music. And this is going to be his big break until he has a sort of... He has the out-of-body experience into this world where he might be dying or going to the afterlife, but then he goes the wrong direction trying to escape and ends up in an area that has not really been touched on in really any material that I can think of, which is the pre-life stage. Which is very interesting, and the way they kind of blend these ideas together, because there's the whole thing where, like if you're one of those people like me, where, like, your, greatest fear is, I mean, obviously, surely everybody's greatest fear is death, but to the point that it, like, haunts you regularly, and you're, like, having an existential crisis every, 2 hours or so. One of the things that you kind of have comfort in, that I've heard, is the idea of, well, if there isn't a great beyond, then after you die is probably just exactly like it was before you were alive. And you were fine then, so you'll be fine on the other side of that. And so that we actually explore the sort of pre-life thing and what the ideas they come up with for this. Because I don't think that some of the ideas in this are as developed as we've seen in previous Pixar things, but even in Inside Out, which is a movie that I think is lesser in quality, does seem like it had maybe some more and bigger ideas than in this. But also just kind of like, as elaborate as the concepts are in this, that kind of gives it almost a bit of a simplicity, given what we're kind of used to. That's kind of appealing, even when you look at some of the characters, where when he goes to the Great Before, as they call it, these people that are in charge, they're all they really don't have any features. They're basically like lines in the shapes of beings, and they all have the same name, despite being voiced by various recognizable voices like Alice Braga and Richard Iowati and Wes Studi and a few others. And it's like just taking ideas like that are simple, but being able to take these featureless characters that all have the same name, but the only thing differentiating them really is like their appearance and their voice. But there's something really appealing about it, that still kind of draws you in immediately, and that's before we've even reached Tina Fey's character. And Tina Fey has to walk a really fine line here, because there's a really tricky thing where you have a character that's annoying because they're meant to be annoying, and the challenge that probably comes with playing a character like that, and being able to be, because the thing about this character is the character also has to be funny and sympathetic. I was sort of somewhat getting Vanellope vibes. This character isn't near even close as charming as as Vanellope is, or as funny. But I do think Tina Fey was really good in regards to how she found the balance of being able to do that kind of character without making it. It has to be annoying for the main character, but not annoying for the audience. Which is such a dangerous territory, and it's so hard to pull off. But I think she did manage to do it. Obviously, a lot of that goes to the writing as well. Um, but another crucial part in this is that another aspect of this whole world, or worlds, is the idea that there's, the great before, and then there's, the great beyond, I'm assuming. And then there's this sort of middle ground where they touch on the idea of when you like zone out completely, you also end up there. And there's in like the sort of like spiritual place, or like an out of body experience sort of way. Kind of has its own sort of like sector here, and that brings in another character who is voiced by Graham Norton, and it's amazing to when Eurovision Song Contest came out, and Graham Norton was actually in it as one of the commentators as himself. I think I said something like, "Wouldn't it be great if Graham Norton got like actual parts in movies?" Because he's so endlessly entertaining, and he actually plays a pretty crucial character here. That's so crucial. He basically gets an entrance every time every time he comes back into the movie, complete with music even, to where you just immediately identify him as his character enters the movie and exits. But talking about this also is a place, obviously, that our character Joe, I think his name is, finds when he plays his music. And one of the questions that I had that I didn't know I didn't know the answer to going into this, was where the music was coming from. Because it's like the music in it has to be he's so significant to the story itself, to the point that when he plays it, it sends him off into this, spiritual sector of this place. And we actually see this, and it's like, it was like original music. It was like, I would think you would have to expect for it being that crucial, that they take the easy way out and just use like a pre-existing piece or something, or an already established, piece that will be recognizable and is already considered some sort of masterpiece. But all the music comes from Jon Batiste, which I had no idea going into this. And as soon as I saw his name in the credits, it's like, it was like kind of a holy shit thing. Like, that was original music, and not some like long-standing masterpiece of sorts. And that adds a whole other thing in regards to what was put into this movie and how much care was put into it. And obviously that's got to come through in when it's getting to its sort of point, or its message, I guess you want to say. The whole thing about finding fulfillment, which is, it's obviously a really old message. It's like the whole, stop and smell the roses thing, and that could seem really played out, but it's really, like, it does do it in like this really unique way where it's I've seen some criticisms since I saw it where they were talking about how it's where it's the whole idea of, is his dream really that important when he's not thinking about, you know, all the small things in life that are worth living for. But it's like, I don't really think that's, it's not saying to like abandon your dreams. It's more of a, don't get consumed by your dreams sort of thing. I think is more so what they're going for. To where it's like, you could like absolutely go for what you want to go for, but it's like if you are striving so hard for that that everything else kind of becomes non-existent to you, you're probably going to end up in a really sort of uh, unfortunately neutral place. Like, there could be some comfort in neutral, but there's also the idea of you just kind of don't do or be anything at all. Um, and it's almost like you're just kind of waiting for something to happen. And when you take all of that into account, is when it kind of feels like they're telling this seemingly played out message in a really strong and powerful way, especially with a lot of the visuals they use here. Um, and there's also other stuff about the whole idea of, you know, like purpose versus the moments you actually live for. Because you do have some moments there that kind of fall in the in between. Like, there's the whole thing of the idea of like mentors and students and stuff like that is a obviously a continuous thing with he and Tina Fey's character and Tina Fey's character in general and her past with all this. But as far as like in the actual world, like Earth section of that, there's this sort of side thing going on that's almost barely there but still powerful, where he has this student that's in his class, and we talked about how mundane his class is and how he's just almost stuck in this place, and his love for the music is a prisoner here, basically. Because none of his students are into it, but there's the one student that goes above and beyond, but then talks about not really being that into it and wanting to quit and stuff like that. And we get that moment where it's like, really, she's just desperate to be heard by somebody. She uses like the facade of quitting just to get him to listen to her play a little bit. And it's stuff like that where just having that one person kind of show you that it's okay to go in that direction, and encourage you and stuff like that. And especially in like kind of a, you know, vulnerable sort of age group where it's like this is where you're gonna make like really drastic decisions that could be life altering when you may not be in the state, the mature enough state to really decide that for sure, what you want and what you actually don't. So, yeah, and obviously I think it goes without saying that, you know, in a like a year like this, people kind of, you know, need the small things in life that might actually that seem mundane at one point might seem like luxuries in another scenario. It feels like all of that is kind of in here, and seemingly inadvertently. So there's that. If there's one thing that kind of brings it down, is that a large portion of the movie, much larger than it probably should be, kind of goes down a normal comedic path of just being like a body swap kind of thing. Like, it's not even necessarily a swapping necessarily, but the fact that he eventually ends up in a body that's not his, and Tina Fey ends up in his body, and it's that whole thing kind of felt very. And it's not just that it feels like that, but that like a lot of its, you know, comedy comes from that, and a lot of the middle portion of the movie comes from that. And it's like that almost felt a little too uninspired compared to how inspired everything else is. So that kind of felt a bit off balance. But everything else is is the stuff that people come to Pixar movies for. So I think that's going to be it for these two. So I think the next two are going to be Ma Rainey's Black Bottom and Sound of Metal, probably. And then we'll go on to Nomadland and Promising Young Woman, and then some other stuff. Tenet, I still need to do. Mank, I still need to do. And I've watched those. I'm just still not entirely sure what I'm going to say about them, but I'll try to figure that out. Hopefully not in real time on camera. I want to try to piece together what I mean before I start, so we'll see how far that actually gets. And I'm doing a couple more Emily Blunt stuff as well. And surely we should be doing award stuff before too long. So there's obviously much more to talk about than we thought there would be. So hopefully that should get started up soon. So until all that stuff, I think that's it.